That means that we're going to form a bus, you see. Because we're going to go on a long, long, long trip. All right, let's see. Get your props, number one. Huh? Put on your hats. Let's get our suitcases. Everything that we need for this enormous trip.
Director Jose Quintero is in the last stages of bringing to life 3 new one-act plays by one of America's most important playwrights, Thornton Wilder. Mr. Wilder has written these new plays expressly for the off-Broadway theater Circle in the Square under the general title, Plays for Bleecker Street. They're taken from 2 cycles of 7 plays each. One cycle is called The 7 Ages of Man, and the other, The 7 Deadly Sins.
This marks. You do the same thing. You come all the way down here because we are going to form the vehicle that is going to take us on that long journey. All right, let's begin. Huh?
Now be quiet and I'll tell you what we're going to do. We've got to hurry, so don't interrupt me.
Now you got to listen to her. You got to listen to her.
And we don't have anybody around us or near us. And we're going to take a bus.
Not until she says we're going to take a bus do you move. Let's take it back. All right. Bus. Just take it from the bus.
And we're going to take a bus.
Now we play this game. Let's start.
All over the world. And we're going to be different persons. And we're going to change our names. I'm Mrs. Arizona. Miss Wilson, please get ready for the trip. What? Miss Wilson, will you put your hat on, please? Oh, I want to be married, too. I want to be Mrs. Wilson. You're too young. People would laugh at you. We'll be gone for years and years. And by in China or somewhere, you can gradually be Mrs. Wilson. I want to be somebody, too.
That's right, with all of the, importance of wanting to be somebody. Huh? All right, let's take that back.
The appearance of these plays is an event of some importance in the American theater, inasmuch as Mr. Wilder, 3 times the winner of the Pulitzer Prize and author of such contemporary classics as Our Town and The Skin of Our Teeth, has not written a new work for the stage in nearly 20 years. In addition to Mr. Quintero, we are happy to welcome to Camera 3 today Mr. Wilder and critic, writer Louis Kronenberger.
Oh, I want to be married.
That's right, you don't want to be Miss Wilson, you want to be a Mrs. Why can't you be a Mrs.? Huh? Why can't you want to be exactly like you are? Why not?
Mr. Kronenberger, as a theater goer and as a critic, and now an ex-critic, have you always been a friend of off-Broadway?
I think a pretty good friend. I think a better friend because of Mr. Quintero, whose productions, it seems to me, have been the best things they've done. But I'm delighted to find that you are such a particular friend of off-Broadway. I think that's much more important. I think for a man of your stature and importance to give these plays an off-Broadway production is not only important in itself, but is a marvelous cue to all kinds of other people to follow your lead. I think to have you off-Broadway is to give Broadway itself a very minor position at the moment. How do you feel about this? I mean, you having lots of fun?
For the last 15 years, I've been noticing increasing disinterest in what we call Broadway. And I just felt that I had ceased to believe in what takes place in the box set. And began to find my reasons after I'd found my uneasiness. And it must have been latent all the while because I'd experimented in various ways of making the stage simpler and simpler. And then I found Mr. Quintero's theater and had so many admirable evenings in his theater that I decided to write for it.
Oh, great. Of course, in a sense, you had helped create what we might think in one way of as off-Broadway years ago. Our Town really preceded a certain conception that we now think of as off-Broadway by almost a generation. I like to think with great pleasure that Our Town was the second play I ever reviewed.
Was it?
In 23 years of reviewing. Yes, it was early in 1938, and I must say that you misled me. I thought at that point that I was in for a wonderful time, fine play, no scenery, but as years went by, more and more it got to be fine scenery, no play. I see, by the way, that our town is being talked about tonight on Invitation to Learning. So this is quite rightly a big Wilder day. But in your experimenting, all of which seems to me extremely natural and individual, there were, of course, owing to the enormous cultivation and learning that you possess, all sorts of little hints, I suppose, in one way or another. I recall at the time of our town that perhaps you yourself had said that the Frank Craven role, the stage manager, had some kind of correspondence in the Chinese theater.
Yes. I had part of my childhood in China, and I knew about it all, never saw a production there. But I think it was teaching the University of Chicago and being deep in teaching Greek tragedies and then on the Elizabethan age, that I had more and more got as self-evident to me that the theater was at its liveliest when there was no representation. And very much picture. And then from that, I wrote Our Town, but then from that I've gone on to a still plainer stage. And what we have is still plainer stage than that.
Well, each one of your plays has constituted a kind of milestone in experiment, certainly in the American sense. And I'm inclined to agree with you. I think that willing suspension of disbelief that Coleridge, or whoever it was, referred to, gets harder and harder when you're faced with something that compels recognition all the time, that you're just seeing a show. I'm willing to accept it when problems of style are involved. I think high tragedy or a certain kind of drawing room high comedy require the actual framework of a stage, but that most of the time your conception and the whole movement toward a looser, freer framework is all to the good. Have you got any further thoughts for experiment?
Suggestion for experiment? No, I think there's a lot so much to explore in this likewise that we haven't exhausted this by a long while. I don't know where to go after that, but it is extraordinary how the theater changes its way of telling a story over and over as the years go by, centuries go by. Maybe return to masks someday, which was absolutely essential to the theater for so long.
It's wonderful how certain absolutely definite forms of artifice and certain absolutely necessary kinds of naturalness, the extremes, seem to be the only really fertile ground for theater development. Of course, right now you're experimenting in not only in terms of staging, but in terms of writing with two such series as The Seven Ages of Man and The Seven Deadly Sins, two of the first and one of the second being in this current bill for Circle in the Square. Did you start off with them both at once, or?
No, I began The Seven Deadly Sins, and then I had a little difficulty with some of the sins, and so I started another series too. Which of the Seven Deadly Sins are you freest of, Mr. Kronenberger?
Well, let me think. I hope of gluttony. I'm afraid that I don't know how free I am of any of them. Let me ask you a slightly more personal question. Which is your favorite deadly sin?
If it's a deadly sin, it's not a favorite. Which do I most deplore?
Well, perhaps so, or
anyway, they are all raging in every human being. All of them are omnipresent in us all. The two I'm having hardest trouble with, because I think I have a little less than others, and therefore finding trouble in writing them, are wrath and envy. I have so little wrath, I ought to have a little bit more, because after all, wrath builds as well as destroys. I don't there's a very good side for envy, except emulation, but I think those are two that the American people lack, too. Envy is a very European pervading thing.
Yes, it is. I think it's coming into American life on a basis of this enforced competitiveness. The pressures of life are creating envy. I don't think it's a natural American quality. Pride, perhaps, is the one that most of us would be least aware of in ourselves. I wonder, have you tried to find correspondences between the 7 ages and the 7 sins?
No, I have tried that.
That'd be awfully hard, wouldn't it? Maybe infancy and gluttony would, and childhood and avarice. I suppose most children do clutch into themselves. After that, it's a free-for-all. But you're still working with each group. I mean, you haven't finished all 7 in either.
Oh, well, Mr. Kronenberger, I write 2 or 3, and then I get dissatisfied with them and put them in what I call the deep freeze. Whether they ever come back or have themselves rewritten, but the very practice of meditating on them makes you see further and further what you'd like to express in a given one, and so you discard the earlier ones.
Are they presenting different problems or different examples of staging? Even though they're all made, I assume, for some kind of arena.
Well, my dream originally was to have every play also a different mode of play. Avarice was a high comedy with cruelty in it, and I wanted 1 no play, 1 verse drama, and so on, but that fell by the wayside.
Are there to be any verse dramas?
I think not. Oh, I can't tell you, serious. You've got lots to fill.
Well, it'd be nice. I think we ought to have a verse drama. Have you ever done any directing yourself?
I have no knack for direction at all. As it were, I'm so blandly happy at the first thing I see that I'm just no help to anybody. I just love what I see. And the only thing in which I have faith is tempo. Is tempo.
Not delivery of lines.
Motivation,
you're not worried by how lines rang in your inner ear and suddenly don't sound quite the same on the stage.
Have you a directorial sense?
Oh, none whatever.
None whatever.
I don't even know what chalking lines on the floor really means, except that that's where I should stop.
Well, our friend Jose Quintero never knew he was to be a director. He discovered it within himself, apparently, when he was interested in other things.
Yes. Well, I think one would somehow or other assume... I think I wrote a school play once, which I tried to direct. I don't know whether it was the direction or whether it was the play, but it was all a terrible flop. Did you start writing plays very young? Of course, I remember your novels with great pleasure.
Very young.
Yes.
But to return for a moment to this belief in the Broadway theater, you know, Gertrude Stein said once that the real problem of the narrative arts in our time is the decline in the belief in an imagined thing. And this applies to the novel as well as to drama very much. You know those old stories that when Dickens' novels were coming out serially, a part of the public in New York would go down to meet the boat.
Oh, yes.
So they could get Death of Little Nell.
So they could get it a little earlier. Well, the same thing in the 17th century when Richardson was writing Grissa, wasn't it? I mean, the idea, the whole country was waiting with bated breath as to whether or not she could be saved from debauchery, yes.
Well, a part of this is, I think, that the public has been badly conditioned by a large part of its numbers to want the plays to be non-pertinent, non-searching. A comedy is supposed to be about yourself, but everybody happily goes and thinks it's about your neighbors.
Quite.
And so that the acid of high comedy and the searchingness of tragedy is something that this new semi-prosperous public doesn't want. So they mute it all by putting it in a proscenium march, where it becomes a removed peep show. And that famous story of the woman in Russia who went to see a performance of Camille and cried tremendously over poor Marguerite Gautier while her coachman froze waiting for her outside. And that kind of a paper doll identification is it is chilling to the heart, and it is a removal from life, and that's what our theater does.
Yes, and there, of course, your feeling about staging and scenery is quite important, because the naturalistic set, which really, in the end, is a substitute for the story.
The first stop, ladies and gentlemen, will be Asadora, Calipala, where there will be 20 minutes for lunch. Where you get to eat the famous heaven fruit sandwich.
Getting ready.
Well, that cat won't be happy, madam. That's our experience. You haven't got the mumps, have you? Well, I'd appreciate it if you sat at a distance from the other passengers.
But that's Papa. Don't
That's right.
be
This
silly.
is fast, quick. In
But
here.
it looks like Papa.
And it looks like Dr. Summers, too.
Billy, I don't know what's the matter with you. Papa wouldn't be working as a bus conductor. Papa's a man that got more money than that.
Your ticket, please, madam.
You want to go to all the places you're going to, please?
Now, remember, we're going on a trip, so it's a great deal of excitement.
Well, you mean this to be a round-trip ticket, don't you? You're coming back here, aren't you?
That's right.
Well, maybe I won't.
Yeah.
Well, I'll punch it on the side here, and that'll mean you can use it to come back whenever you want.
Come here.
Say, I think I've seen your face before, madam. Weren't you in that terrible automobile accident? Blood all over the road and everything.
All right, let's take a break for a couple of minutes. Well, how do you think it's going?
Oh, it's going fine. How do you feel?
Fine.
I feel great.
Charming.
They're working out. This is my first experience in working with children.
In 10 years?
In 10 years. My first one, and I find it so
Well,
absolutely
it doesn't seem
marvelous.
that way at all.
No. Well, I think this...
Almost like their father.
Well, maybe a little of that creeps in.
Jose, we were talking about the arena stage, and we wanted to ask you, you were the one we think of as the one who personally made this for us in America. What do you think of its development since, your foster children, so to speak?
Well, I've seen very little arena staging. There's one in Washington, and I know that there's one in, what was it, Margot Jones Theater, that one. I'm very partial to the three-quarter arena for two very simple reasons. One is the fact that the human figure becomes the important thing, and it's endowed with all of its dignity. And the fact that there is no, the communication between the actor, the communication between the playwright and his audience is direct. It is intimate. As I was walking around, I heard Mr. Wilder speak about the gulf that sometimes proscenium theater, not that I'm against proscenium either for certain things, the gulf that proscenium theater creates in the minds of the theater goer, in the fact that they do not recognize themselves, they do not make the immediate identification that that action which the actor is performing on the stage is absolutely relevant to themselves, because it is comfortable, because it is removed, because it is...
Yes, in a sense, it might almost be symbolic that they are aware of and approving of this barrier between themselves. This, in the end, is just something that they're accepting as entertainment.
As entertainment. I had an experience in the arena that was, sort of proves this point. It was the first play we ever did, called Dark of the Moon. The revival scene in this play, and all the people were singing revival songs, and it would get so heated that sometimes you would feel this movement in the audience. They were in the revival. I also found it in The Iceman Cometh, for instance. The people that came to see that play, once they were in that theater, they were not people from uptown going on a what is that kind of a game, a hunt, some kind of a hunt.
Treasure.
Treasure hunt, down the Bowery, but they were forced to be patrons of Harry Hope's bar.
But there was no question, because one had seen the production Uptown and then seeing yours down. Yours worked better in every way, not only because your direction was better, but because there was this real need for integration with a play like that. And I can remember feeling just as close as I was physically to part of the show in terms of what was going on.
Well, I also get that I believe is one of the magnificent things about the plays that I'm doing and what I felt when I did Our Town, and I'll say it in front of Thornton, may embarrass him, but is the painstaking selection, There is not an extra word. There is not an extra, there's no embellishment for the sake of embellishment. When he demands a bare stage and a couple of chairs, he takes the responsibility through that selection of creating a world, and he does it.
Well, that's the virtue, of course, of a really good playwright and the bare stage. Most poor playwrights can't survive a bare stage.
No.
They need all the
entertain their
padding,
audience
they need
and,
all the decor.
The
The only problem I've ever noticed with arena staging is that occasionally when there has to be a kind of mass exiting, it almost looks like a funeral procession or a bridal procession as they all go off, but I suppose you've found solutions to that.
Well, a lot of, like at the Circle at the beginning, it was a nightclub.
Mm.
It wasn't a theater. It was a nightclub. So things like exits and entrances, you know, had to be according to the regulations of a nightclub. I think that in the place that we are now, there was a theater which we turned, was a proscenium theater, which we turned into the same kind of plan as the Circle. There, you know, all of those exits are provided for. Very strange that the Circle started in a nightclub in the same kind of a plan that they had there. You know, the Circle like that for people danced and the orchestra. And we kept it exactly as it was.
You told us once a story about a kind of play you saw coming from your own country that gave you help on this thing.
Well, I tell you, I have, I said that my background in the theater, I have never studied directing anywhere, and my background in the theater and my roots in it spring from my childhood, my early education, which was in the Catholic Church. I used to spend the summers in a remote town in the mountains, in which during Holy Week they played the crucifixion, and they played it according to their own idea, very primitive idea of what it was. And one of the remarkable things that have stayed in my mind was the fact that when we entered the church, there was a wooden Christ and a cross, and he had no hair whatsoever, and he was not alive. No one paid any homage to him whatsoever. He was dead. And the group of young girls in the corner that had pledged their hair, you see, for the Christ. And one was selected, and in front of you, this hair is cut like nuns entering a convent. They gathered this hair together with a ribbon, a purple ribbon, and then they would carry this hair onto the Christ on the cross. The minute that the hair was put on his face, the whole congregation would fall on its knees, and they immediately, out of that single prop, if you want to call it, reduce it to that level, gave life to an inanimate object. He became alive out of one thing. And it taught me a question of selectivity, and it also taught me that the audience is half of what creates a complete belief in the theater.
Well, there you get the actual working creative power of symbolism, you see, where the one thing broadens out into the whole story, and where the imagination is enormously enlivened and stimulated rather than almost stifled, as it so often is, by too much scenery, too much decor, too much costume.
And you know, they play this play every year. And every year, this play is as equally alive as it was the year before.
it's again this different, I mean, this, the extremes of mask and utter naturalness, the extremes of sumptuousness and utter severity seem to be the two things that work best in the theater, of great ceremony or of absolute naked presentation.
Well, I think that the Thornton's plays, inherent in them, have a sense of ritual. That I'm speaking as a director. Well, I think I better go back and do some work on your plays.
Well, thanks as always, Jose. Thanks as always.
Betty, Dana, now that we have formed this buzz, let's come into the buzz. Let me get you a chair, which will be your driver's seat, as you're going to guide us into this adventure. All right, let's take it up from there.
From the entrance of the bus?
From there, yeah, please. From over there. Now remember, there's an enormous excitement in this trip, or we wouldn't be playing this game unless it delighted us. All right?
Don't
Let's
run.
begin.
But if we hurry, we can each get a seat by the window.
Take your places in line, please. The first stop, ladies and gentlemen, will be Ashagora, Kalapala, where there will be 20 minutes for lunch.
Yourselves for that trip.
That's the place where you get to eat the famous heaven fruit sandwich. That cat won't be happy, ma'am. That's our experience. You haven't got the mumps, have you? Well, I'd appreciate it if you sat at a distance from the other.
For joining us today on Camera 3, our thanks to playwright Thornton Wilder, critic and writer Louis Kronenberger, and director Jose Quintero. And also to the members of the cast who were with us in rehearsal, Debbie Scott, Susan Towers, Philip Fisco, the children, Betty Miller, and Dana Elcar, the adults.
So you mean this to be a route?
Mr. Wilder's evening of plays for Bleecker Street, will open on January 11th at Circle in the Square in New York City under the direction of Mr. Quintero.
I've seen your face before, madam.
Next week, we look forward to bringing you an unusual artist, one of remarkable talent. He is English lutenist and guitarist Julian Brink.
What's your name, sir, if I may?
Our thanks to you for having made Camera 3 a weekly habit throughout the year, and I hope you will find it possible to be with us next week on Camera 3.